Hello and welcome to Good, Bad, or Bullshit. My name is Crofton Steers. I'm the Jared Kushner of this podcast. With me, as always, are my two co-hosts. I'm talking about the Donald Trump Jr. of this podcast, Michael Hodgins. Michael, welcome.
Don Jr.,
Ew.
sweet.
And that means Eric Trump will fall to Bo Schwartz. Hey, Eric.
Oh, I thought you were going to give him Steve Bannon.
What?
Are you
That's a
trying?
stretch.
Are you trying to make us all feel bad before starting the show?
Yeah, mission
Like,
accomplished.
I feel it's topical right now because,
Topical.
again, this episode will be released late, but the White House is presently melting down.
Right.
So
It's been melting down since he took
I know.
office.
So
God.
maybe this episode will actually age well.
No,
maybe
it won't. Remember when I referred to last summer when you were like, he'll be impeached in 2 months, and I was like, oh, it won't happen to the fall, and look, he's going strong. If anything, it's just going to make us all look dumb, because in 7 years from now, when he's wrapping up his second term, we'll be like, oh, God, how did this
Actually, one of the several pieces of crazy news to break this week was that he had established like a leader for his re-election bid, which it's very early to start planning.
That person will clearly be fired before that election happens.
Yeah, I know, for
Come
sure.
on.
What do you mean a banner for his re-election bid? What does that mean?
Oh, it's because there's the staff that work on a president's re-election campaign for the next election cycle can't be the people necessarily that help them do their day-to-day job in the White House.
Okay.
So he's already pulling together a team to run his re-election campaign, which won't happen for 3 years. So it's pretty crazy.
Well, I think he needs all the lead time he can get it. That's what it's
Yeah,
like.
probably.
Well, I feel like they're almost in permanent election mode down there. It's like it's never far from their minds, or any politicians really,
And in fact, in Canada, when we were talking about setting permanent election dates, one of the arguments against it, because the government of the day can essentially call an election whenever they feel like it, whenever they feel they've lost confidence in the House in Canada or whatever. But in the States, they have a very specific day, and everything is very specific, which seems good, except it just means that everybody is planning for the next election cycle nonstop. There's one election, then there's another one, and there's exploratory committees, and then another one, and it just never ends. Speaking of things that never end around here, I just moved houses, and I let you guys know before the show, but for all the listeners, and this is a bit of a throwback to an early episode, I'm experiencing bass through the walls, music. It's a semi-detached that I'm living in, and I'm pretty confident that my verdict for bass was bad. And every once in a while, I feel a little guilt about that verdict. I think I'm like, well, maybe I was too hard on our friend Bass, but I was not. If anything, I was not hard enough.
Well, it's funny that because when you were talking about that, it made me think of the semi-detached house I lived in pretty recently. Except the thing I heard through the wall was domestic dispute, and that was it. As much as you don't like bass, hearing a domestic dispute next door is much more annoying because you're like, should I call the police? And then, maybe I'll just go to sleep and hope nothing bad happens.
Or you want to go over for the bass and knock on the door and be like, hey, you mind turning your sound down? But we're Canadians, and so being super polite, especially they're separate owners and all that, that's a different thing. For us, it's very difficult for me to walk on that door and be like, knock, knock. Hey, got loud music. You mind turning it down a bit? But domestic abuse, or a domestic conflict, that's even worse. It's knock, knock, knock. Hey guys, so kind of hear your conversation next door. Would you mind maybe keeping the profanity down? I got kids.
Well, it's more like you don't want to do that because you're like, if someone's about to go off the rail and kill their significant other, when the neighbor knocks on the door at the exact wrong time, you might be that third person who gets killed. You're like,
you know what? I love my significant other too much to murder them, but you I could kill.
It is funny though, because one of the reasons I'm thankful we live in Canada, where it's probably like someone's gonna have a knife or something, and not a semi-automatic weapon or a handgun or something. It's probably gonna be.
That's
I
true. That
saw
actually happened down the road from me.
someone got stabbed.
Yeah, some guy at the grocery store a few blocks away, and where Crofton used to live, stabbed a bunch of people, like 4 people, and then the cops shot him
Yeah,
dead.
and then the police shot him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because that happened at like 6:30 in the grocery store that I used to go to every day at 6:30. So the fact that I've moved houses, I hate the base, but at least I'm not stabbed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
being not stabbed is good.
Yeah, so for sure. Speaking of not stabbed, this is going to be a stretch here, but the
go for it.
hose of the random topic generator has not been stabbed and continues to function for 200 plus episodes. Let's
That was
break.
really, yeah. Stretch was given that too much credit, I think.
Let's bring it out and choose a random topic.
All right.
Okay, let me
Let's
push
do
the
so.
random topic generator button here.
I think that was smooth.
Oh wait, it's not a button. Ignore what I just said.
Ah,
All right.
finally something right up your guys' alley, and I'm talking about first-person shooters.
Oh, it's actually topical.
You're like, I played one today, as I have the last 15 years.
Okay, so yes, that's also true. But look, it's topical because Trump, in the wake of this, horrific Parkland shooting and all the renewed discussion of gun control, has pulled one of the famous moves of the gun circuits, if you will, and put the blame on video games and video game, to the point that next week he is in fact going to be meeting video game industry executives to sort of get to the bottom of some of this stuff, right? So it is topical. Also, that reference will be totally out of date by the time the show airs, so people will know how that meeting went.
Well,
Whatever.
no, by then there'll be another mass U.S. shooting, and someone will be like, it's a video game. I mean, like, it's funny because I've played a lot of first-person shooters, not recently, but I certainly played a bunch. And now that I don't really play them anymore, I have like kind of a little bit of distance between how fucking violent they are. I'm like, you could totally understand. Now, I think that that's not true, what Donald Trump's saying, or anyone that says that that's why those things happen. But when you look at a first-person shooter, like the aim of the game, it's like you're killing as many people as you can with a gun. That's what it always is. And just on the face of it, you're like, yeah, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good.
It's true. It definitely doesn't look good. I remember it first took the first furor around it. Like there was the whole 90s video games or evil thing, and Mortal Kombat was a big on the front lines, but so was the original Doom. I remember the kids that shot up the Columbine. It was found that they had played Doom, and obviously the conversation got diverted to Doom, which literally every kid had played at this point, over the guns or any of the other major issues. And it is funny to think back and be like no offense to Doom, but it is very violent for its time, but it is pixely and you're fighting alien hell monsters in space and all this sort of stuff. Whereas nowadays, like I think you have games like it could be Call of Duty or a Battlefield or something like that, where graphics are way more realistic and you're shooting at humans in this. So like I would argue now is while there's a wide variety of first-person shooters, there's some that could really you could take clips and play on the news and it would not look good.
Bo, you play some first-person shooters?
I do. Although not that much actually. But, this year did see me play some of that Doom, which was quite fun. Doom, a franchise still going strong. One of the quintessential first-person shooters, in fact. For tracing back our history, though technically not the first, the first one that really gave you a sense of place and realism that is unique to the first-person genre was Wolfenstein, and that company went on to go make Doom, and you definitely saw the Doom game on your 6 o'clock news, where the reporter would be like, "Are your kids in trouble? Should they not be playing this?" And they'd show a demon from hell getting plugged with a shotgun. Yeah, and they just released a Doom game this year or last year.
Both those references are, and like when you look at like who you're shooting, and I think that's there's an important sort of like, what's the rationale behind this character? Why is he shooting these other characters? In the first one that Bo referenced, it's Nazis, which up until recently we all agreed were evil, and then it's Hellspawn, that are literally from hell and are still considered evil until probably next year. I don't know. But to my point, like a lot of that is changing. And as games get more complicated, first person shooters are getting more complicated as well. There's a lot of games that are played in first person perspective that are not necessarily shooters. There's a big renaissance of what these things called walking simulators right now.
But the topic is first person shooter.
Right. So I'm sort of just separating that a bit, because there's a lot of like ones with swords and stuff like that now from the first person perspective. But like for the sake of this conversation, let's just keep it focused on the ones that are like you're shooting weapons.
Did you guys ever play a game called Heretic?
Yeah. That was the first game that I played online. Ever.
Oh man, I didn't play it online.
No, I played it. It was a dial-up modem, so I literally had to phone my friend, who had to tell his parents not to pick up the phone. My parents had to not pick up the phone, and then my computer would connect with his. I could be like,
I'm still impressed it actually allowed you to play against each other. But what I recall, and I'm pretty sure is that game. Maybe it's not, but like. Again, the violence of it. There were certain types of characters sometimes that were like these. It was humans, and if you shot them enough times, they would go onto the ground and then on their knees and wave their hands and say, "No, please, no, please." And if you didn't kill them, they'd get back up and start shooting at you. So it's like the game was teaching you to kill the person begging for mercy, because if you didn't, they would then shoot you. So of course, as a kid, I would always take out the bazooka or whatever and explode the person, and it would there was like an eyeball that would fly by you, like extremely gruesome. And also the context, which I didn't think of when I was 15 or whatever, but like this person is begging for their life, and you're just like, and the game is telling you must kill this person or they will. It's just Heretic, so many of these like very basic kind of like what are the messages that a first-person shooter is giving to you?
Well, it depends on the game. Like, and I will say, like, there's some base messages you can draw across all of them, but it definitely does depend on the game, because some lean heavily, like horror films do, into gore and like there's this series called Soldier of Fortune, which is like really, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was about like guys would explode and their legs would go flying, and it'd be, it was massive gore. And there was a level of detachment also, because graphics weren't necessarily what they are today and what they will continue to be, but definitely I find that that there's a reason these games are popular. And I think about myself, and I think about first-person shooters, because I do, like, to Bo's point, he's like, oh, I don't play that many first-person shooters. I go through phases because it's just one type of game now. But I would say one of my favorite games, if not my favorite game of all time, it's a little bit of a deep cut, but you guys both know it, it's PlanetSide. And I'm currently playing PlanetSide 2, are both first-person shooters. And Bo mentioned Wolfenstein, and it's recently been relaunched in sort of a B movie style. And I played the last one, and I'm looking forward to playing the next one and really enjoy that. It has a big sort of storyline, again in the Inglourious Bastards type mode of like, we're killing Nazis or whatever. But yeah, it depends. Like Overwatch is one of the biggest, most popular right now. It goes for more, say, of a cartoony aesthetic. But what brings all these things together is the feeling of like shooting and I have no interest in shooting a real gun or like getting a real gun or whatever, but there's something that's appealing to me about this. Maybe it's because it works well with the mouse and keyboard. Maybe it's because it's a very easy thing to get right in a video game, like to replicate. It's like, okay, I aim and then I click a button and then I shoot projectiles towards it. Whereas other games have more complexities that you gotta understand and get around. So maybe that's what makes them appealing. But there's no argument that they are extremely appealing. I'd say the biggest ones being the Call of Duty franchise, Counter-Strike, Overwatch, and Battlefield. And I think demographically, if you look at who plays them, it's not only men, but a large percentage of men play these games.
Yeah, and like when I was thinking, as you were talking, in kind of like you're like an insider in this, in the sense that you play a lot of these games and you're like a gamer, and I'm less so now. I was thinking about like, because you're like, well, it depends, like, because I was like, what are these games teaching? And you're talking about different aesthetics or different overlays, and it's true, but I do think like all those things are important. But I do think like the basic thing is teaching you, and as a game is like. It's you solve the problem you're solving in the game is solved by shooting things like that. Like that's, if any game is a problem solving exercise, any first person shooter game, to solve the problem you must shoot some stuff. Now I know there's some games where that is like the degree to which you shoot things is maybe you have some degree where you don't have to shoot everything you see, but I feel like most of them are just like, if you're the best at shooting and killing all your opponents, you're probably the best at the game. Problem solved. And, just from, again, I'm not like...
But it's not a teaching tool. Like you're...
Well, it's not that it's a teaching tool.
It's an entertainment like, product.
But it's not that it's teaching, but it is implying something. And it's just like... again, the context of the game. And it's like, there's so many of these games. And to be like I guess it's just... I think your point about that it's easy... It's probably part of the reason, because it does kind of make sense. The mouse, the keyboard, it works pretty well. It gives you a sense of immersion. And I guess it's like, and excitement, and living in a fantasy of like shooting a gun. Most of us do not want to shoot someone in real life, and but shooting someone in a video game is a different thing. And I think we all know it's a different thing, but it's just
it's the same as like paintball or laser tag. Like I enjoy playing those games. I like checking my score afterwards, all that sort of stuff. But it's not like I don't have any interest in joining the military, or committing shootings or anything like that.
But there is fantasy probably in certainly men more so than women, which I think mentioning that demographic split is important. Because I think a lot of men do sort of have these kinds of fantasies about like shooting things. Like I'm like a totally non-violent person, but with all this stuff with like shooting, and you're like, oh, what would happen if someone snapped at my work or something and was coming with a gun? Like, would you try to get them? Or, these things will occasionally cross my mind. And apparently like a lot of men, well, this is like male fantasy where women don't generally spend their time having some silly fantasy of like what happens if a psycho comes to your work and just shooting the place up. That doesn't. And then so are these games just like outlets for that kind of thing, which is happening kind of naturally with men anyways? I don't know.
Well, you look at that explanation sounds a lot like Die Hard and stuff like that, and you look at this stuff. And in movies and in everywhere, like shooting and action and all that, and sort of violent culture is a big thing. And I think first person shooters are a part of that. But like, if you look at how they're marketed and how they're designed, the reason that men play them is because they have been designed for men. And they've been designed to appeal to that audience. Because I revert back to Overwatch. Now, Overwatch is a relatively new game, but it has a lot of female players, like a considerable percentage of the population of players. And it's because it has been designed in a different way to appeal more broadly, right? And I think that that's just becoming known a little more. So I even though I was the one that threw the more men play it thing, I don't necessarily think that will always be the case. But I do agree, Mike, with what
I
you're
think it
saying.
will. Like, I think it's very unlikely that you'll ever see gender parity in the something like Call of Duty. I will be shocked if
But
that
Call
happens.
of Duty is it's
Well, it's a first
targeted
person
at
shooter.
men.
It's
No,
in some
I know,
ways it's a
but you're
pure
picking one
first
that's
person shooter.
targeted at men, right? Like it's getting the
So
demographic that
what's
it's
one
targeted for.
targeted at women gonna be?
Well, Overwatch is more targeted at a gender neutral stuff. There's characters both, male and female and all that sort of stuff. But would you agree with me on this
Yeah,
that
I think
like
the gender conversation is problematic. I kind of don't want to wade into it because I disagree with it.
With what?
It's maybe statistically true that more men play, but I don't think there's anything important to be like to get.
I
out
think
of
there's
that.
something hugely important about it because it's
No.
also
Because I
it's
just
also
think
the
it's
fact that
a bias versus
it's not because I mean if you look at the statistics around violent crime, it's massively disproportionate men.
but it's
And
like it doesn't mean
you don't
anything.
think those things are related? You don't think that men like violent video games and men commit most of the violence in society has any kind of linkages?
I don't like. I don't think this has anything to do with first person. Like this whole topic went into a direction that I'm not interested in.
I know
wading
because
into.
you want to just say like they're awesome. I love shooting shit, but I mean I'm not a gamer really anymore, so I don't mind like pulling them apart. And I've played a lot of them. I mean they're older ones, but I feel like I have a different perspective now because I'm not in the culture of it.
I don't think there's a correlation between violence and first person shooters. There might be
definitely
a
not one
correlation
that you
in a
could
decrease.
establish.
There can be a correlation and a decrease in violence based on the kinds of media we consume, including video games. But I don't think there's an increase in violence because of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, I want to be clear. Like, I don't think that people who like playing first-person shooters will lead someone to commit violent acts. I do think though that men are more likely to commit violence and are more likely to have violent-based fantasies, and that first-person shooters are clearly a violent exercise. And I think that makes total sense. And I think if you look at the demographics, it makes complete sense that it's more men that play it than women. Like those things, to me, I'm like, those things line up perfectly. And it's not a judgment call of like, it's not going to make people do violent stuff, but men have a greater inclination towards violence. And this is
I'm just going to take your word
testosterone-related.
for it. I don't disagree with you, but I also not going to pretend to know that like what demographics are nowadays because that landscape is shifting and it's leaving. If you're not involved in it, it's leaving a lot of us behind. I don't think spreading out to gaming in general that the gap between men and women is as wide as mainstream media would like us to believe. Saw an article today that's been going around about how gaming companies are profiting off men living in women's basements. Most gamers are working adults. They don't live in their mom's basements. There's a lot of stereotypes around it, and the one about men I think is part of it. And furthermore, I don't think first-person shooter games, while they simulate violence a little more viscerally, are any more violent than any other type of video game for the most part. You can get just as much blood and gore.
I just finished playing this game Overcooked with Crofton, and I'll tell you, it is not violent.
Yeah, but you're
no, but like that Overcooked is like
that's a totally different game. But Bo just said, I don't think they're any more violent than any other game, and I'm like, well, no, they are more violent.
No, what I'm saying is
games.
that as a category, that it's worth actually teasing first-person shooters apart specifically as being more violent than any other genre that contains violence. Is like they're third-person games.
I would agree with that. There's a lot of other violent games.
Like gaming in general, if that's your bent, is violent because most of it is based around combat of some kind, whether it's simulated with
and again,
an AI
coming
or
back
against
to the
other
men
players.
thing, it is and you're right about the changing landscape about women in this in gaming, but it's a very well-known fact that there are precious few women game designers. That's changing, but very, very few. So we're also, I just think these things are all kind of connected. Like men kind of like violence. Men make video games or have, and men play video games more. This stuff is all changing. But I could see there being a day where the first-person shooter is like a small niche of video games.
To go down your rabbit hole, like if if say video games are being made, they're first person shooters targeted to men are like say more prone to these crimes, does this not give them an avenue of escapism to like satisfy in a harmless way any sort of like you think about
Definitely, I think yes, maybe very well so.
Your thoughts in terms of like what you would do in a terrorist situation at your work or whatever, like it's like that's very mild stuff, but it's like, oh, you play a video game, oh, it's fun, you get a sense that, what's the scenario in this one, okay. For me, when I play a first-person shooter, I'll tell you one thing that is super important is contextualizing who I'm shooting, and this is a big deal because I've had games like pull the rug out from under me at one point, like and make like I think even one of the Deus Ex games, which I quite enjoyed, did this at one point where where it reveals like these guys that you were fighting at the beginning were in fact good all along or whatever, and you're like, oh shit, right? But the thing is that a lot of first-person shooters now, or not a lot, but some of them, like Deus Ex, are designed with non-lethal playthroughs where you can get like crossbows with sleep darts, and you can do all this stuff. That's part of that game's design. But for me, I just find like who I'm shooting is really, really important in those games, because I'm not able to like to just be like, okay, it's cool to shoot anyone in any context. Like, what's my character? What am I doing? And that. So I do think that like there is to get a player on board to enjoy a first-person shooter, it's the same as designing a movie, for Christ's sake. Like, for you to support this character shooting all these characters, like they just remade and released this weekend Death Wish, which was a Charles Bronson series of like vigilante shooters. The timing could not be worse with obviously what's going on in the States, but with Bruce Willis, and like, of course, they have to set up why this character, who are these people that he's shooting? Why is he so angry to be shooting these characters, for you as an audience member to go on that sort of journey? So for me, I think that like a lazy first-person shooter is can be almost offensive to me in the sense that like, I'm like, oh, this is just violence for violence sake, which some of them are, but then there's there's storylines. There's in the case of PlanetSide, which every character is a real person, and you're all working together, and that sort of stuff. So it's a bit of a different thing. But even in that world, they set up, okay, you're part of this faction, they're part of that faction. You hate each other. You're trapped in endless war. I'm like, okay, I can roll with that. So no, for me as a gamer as well, like thinking about first-person shooters, I like some of my I think I line up with Bo in that like some of my favorite games are first-person shooters, but I would say that is not my favorite game type, right? And that's not going to be a selling point to me. And I will say another thing that concerns me about first-person shooters is I do have the first generation of sort of VR in my house, and I've tried some shooters, and the first one that I played, this game Robo Rally, you're shooting these evil robots. They're super played for cartoon laughs, right? No biggie, whatever. Other game called Super Hot, you're shooting like these glass silhouettes that explode into pieces of glass. So again, no biggie, doesn't really make, they're just silhouettes. They don't really mean anything. But eventually, as technology advances, I'm not sure if these are still called first-person shooters because they're in VR, but they provide that same sort of sensation. I could see that, like, if you wanted to project down the road, I could see the dangers of something like that. But I don't think where we are now is anywhere near that.
Can I like put a bookmark on this, because we're well into the show now, just to say we could talk about what we really want to talk about, but we've done violence in the media, and I kind of a topic like first online. Is it online or is it just first person shooters?
Just first person shooters.
Yeah, when that topic comes up, the last thing I want to talk about is its social impact. To be honest, like I don't care.
That's the main thing I want to talk about. But
I know, because that's your only involvement with it. But like we've covered it on violence in the media, which included video games. And if we want to talk about it again, that's fine. It's just I don't have I don't have anything to add to it because I think it's stupid. Like, basically, I mean, it's simulated violence, but gameplay aspect wise, it's couldn't be anything further from shooting in real life. So, for those of us who can't separate our fantasy from real consequences, impact, or whatever, then yeah, it's an issue. But it's not an issue for me and for anyone I know who plays these games. So, I think spending too much time on it gives it more weight than it's worth. And I'd like to say...
I disagree wholly with that. But
I know
if
you
there's
do.
another aspect you want to chat about...
I don't. That's what I'm saying is I'm not contributing anymore to this particular aspect of the topic.
But you have nothing about... no, what I mean is you said you want to go in a different direction with the first-person shooters conversation. I mean, I have plenty more to say about the social impact stuff. But right. I mean, obviously I'm in the minority here.
Well, I mean, Crofton does too. So I'm just jumping in to say, like, we're 30 minutes into the show, and it's just mainly been about the social impact and how guys mostly play shooters. I don't like the direction the conversation is going, and if I seem uninvolved in it, it's because this isn't a conversation about online shooters.
You don't like it. It's interesting. Is it because shooters. It makes you feel? Is this tack of?
It's because this conversation has been happening for like not 38 years, but 30 years of my life. I'm fucking bored of it. Like, I just don't give a shit. So, like, I'm sure there's merit to the people who want to have meaningful conversations. For me, it's very obvious the answer is simulated fantasy can be provocative, and as art is meant to be, and games can be a form of art. And certainly,
can be, yeah.
Like, we might say, well, pornography is allowed, but child porn isn't. We draw our line somewhere to the types of things we find it socially acceptable to simulate. But that's what that conversation is. And so for me, first-person shooters are a game type. And most games are violent, including top-down games, war games, strategy games. There's a bit more visceralness to the first-person shooter, but I don't think it's enough to warrant a conversation about this subset of games.
Yeah, I mean, I just think the two are inherently related. I mean, the last bit I'll say on this, and I'm happy to switch it completely after this, but I think it's just like humanity's violent. It's like, and I still think that basically we sort of use violence in our society everywhere to solve all problems. And it's sort of a natural thing to see in gaming, a pretty dominant thing to be like to solve the game, use violence to solve the problems in games, because this is basically how we do it in the real world. I mean, even with laws, it's all hinged on the threat of violence. Like if you don't obey laws, eventually a policeman will come to your house and hit you on the head if you don't go with him. If you follow those things to their conclusion. So that's why to me that it is pertinent, because there's so much violence in our society, and so it's reflected in our fantasy and our art. And I guess what always irks me and why I move away from them is because I'm like, I don't like this aspect of humanity, and I feel like the more we move away from it, the better. But we're mired in it. It only makes sense that it's a reflection of who we are. So it makes total sense. And I certainly engage in violent gameplay. We played D&D the other day and slaughtered hundreds of goblins in fantasy. I'm like, it has its place, and we all need our outlets like that. I think some of them are gratuitous, but anyways, I don't need to believe.
But what I would say though, like, and this is in terms of what Bo's point here is that this show is about
not making a point.
You did make a point. Is about drawing a topic and discussing if it's good, bad, or bullshit. If you know or have a feeling of why first-person shooters are one of those three things, like, make that case. We were just having a discussion based on some of the elements. Like, I sort of know and was going to seg into some of the positives and the interesting experience that I've had with them, but just refusing from either having the conversation or engaging with someone else because you don't like the angle. Like, just go with talk about what you think is either good or problematic about them in setting up whatever your verdict is going to be. Because I'll be honest, right now I have no idea what your verdict is going to be, whereas I have somewhat of a sense of what Mike's is going to be.
Okay, so what makes first-person shooters great is that it puts you in the perspective of the player, and it allows you to simulate adventuring in real life. So concurrent to the first-person shooter was also the ability to experience a game from the first-person perspective. Like that was a novel thing, and yes, it's coincided with shooters. But as Crofton, I don't know if you self-dismissed or Mike dismissed it. I don't think we can easily dismiss the non-shooter first-person game because it was born out of a desire to play shooters, and that shooter was the genre to start with. But we have all this other, Skyrim isn't a shooter, still kill shit and it's violent, but it's awesome. And there, you have a bow and arrow. I'd consider it a shooter, but it's also an RPG filled with rich voice acting and lore and immersion, and you can wear a VR headset and be in there, and it's cool. And so
Portal 2 is a good example.
Portal
it's
2.
a game where you actually have a gun.
It's a portal gun. Yeah.
Except you're solving puzzles. It's used in a different way.
So I mean, we could talk about just the violent part, and shooter implies violence, but like laser tag, yes, it simulates violence and it simulates the invention of the gun, but it's fun. There's something fun about it. What it does, which good games do, is that it's something that you can play and then feel you have to master, like get better and improve at. And as a particular type of genre, it's fun getting sniper kills. It's fun being able to sneak around and have limited visibility to be able to kill things, from close range. So there are different skills there that there's a lot of mechanical depth and complexity, which make it fun to play first-person shooters as opposed to other genres. I've played a ton. I'm at the point actually where I don't have as much of an appetite anymore for it, only because I'm so amazing at them that I'm bored with. There's other genre video games that I'm more interested in, also violent, but they, it's still excellent. Overwatch is a great game, and I played Doom this year and had a lot of fun. And they're only getting better. I find the experiences they're still improving on it, and they're wonderful. Yeah.
So every year the video games sort of do awards in the same way that TV or movies, and there's a category for first-person shooters. I only bring that up because even though it feels like they're waning a little bit in terms of numbers, there's less big ones that come out every year, they occupy a big presence in video games. So I do sort of think that this topic is worth looking at outside of just video games in general and all that. And so my take on the first person shooters, on my personal feeling is I do quite enjoy playing them. A game being a first person shooter is not necessarily a sales point for me. I'll be much more keen on sort of the sort of dynamic of the game, or the storyline, or is it multiplayer, is it single player? One I think comparator, when we would play this game PlanetSide, I would almost always be in first person mode, but it allowed you to toggle between first and third person mode. And Bo, I remember, would always toggle between the two. He'd sort of stand in corners and toggle. And the reason he did that is essentially if he was in third-person mode, he could see sort of what was around the corner from his character, right? So he had an appetite for getting as much information as possible to make an informed decision, whatever, on the battlefield. Honestly, if you were a smart soldier or a smart person in a combat situation and you had that,
you probably a tactical advantage for sure.
You probably should take advantage of it if you had that magical ability to get outside of yourself and see around the corner. Right. I didn't very often, and the reason why is I was looking for a much more immersive experience. And when I play video games, especially single-player games, I'm looking for that immersive experience. And definitely in terms of escapism, I'm looking for it. And I do feel that first-person games, shooters as well as any, like a game like BioShock or whatever, allows you to inhabit a character a lot more comfortably in terms of suspension of disbelief, for better or for worse, than a third-person game does, where you see your character and you recognize that character doesn't look anything like you. Now, if you can get over the motion sickness-y type stuff of playing a first-person shooter, which my wife can't, then you get a sense of inhabiting that character. And I think that's why I made the linkage to virtual reality as seeing it eventually going in that direction. And that's why I have little bits of concerns around the first person shooter's impact, and why I engage in this as well, because I just think like immersion is really great for escapism and I love it, but some people might it might flatter an unhealthy part of their brains, or it might enable them in a certain way. So I am cognizant of that, but it doesn't necessarily, like, it's not going to stop me from playing first person shooters. It's definitely not going to make me call for them to be, regulated or banned. But I do, to your point about where the line is, I do feel like I have a personal line where if a game came out and it was like offensive to my sensibilities in some way, I'd be like, okay, that's not for me.
Yeah, I mean that line could be something else. It doesn't have to be shooters for you. It could be something else, right? Something you found egregious, Like, I mean, we live in an age that there's not just first person shooters, but there's first person sex simulator. Like any lewd act, people are working, if it doesn't exist already, to program it as well into a game form or into a simulated reality form, and everyone's got a line somewhere.
It is because it's funny that you bring that up, because when Croft was talking about
it's a different kind of shooter.
What?
It's a different kind of shooter.
Well, it made me think of this thing that I had heard someone discuss on. It was like a tech show on on the radio, and they were talking about sex robots, and then they talked about like
it was good, bad, or bullshit.
What?
It was our show, good, bad, or bullshit.
No, it wasn't our show. Well. We did bring that up, but what they were saying is that, like, and it's just interesting where the morality and where your line is, because it said, so what if you had like children's sex dolls, like sex dolls that look like children, for pedophiles to have sex with, and you're like, and even though you're like, okay, look, yeah, I saw Bo's facial expression and mine too. I'm like, oh, that feels like that's not right, and then but they might say like, but hey, if it stops them from being pedophiles in the real world, isn't that positive? And I'd be like, yeah. And then I'm like, and so for me, and again, I can't probably get off this violence thing, but this is all fantasy, and be like, yeah, it's like we're all scratching an itch of the violence because we can't do it in real life. That's why it's fantasy. But where is that line? You know what I mean? And it is interesting because I think the cartoony, and I haven't played Overwatch, but I've seen a bit of it. And, that's much more appetizing to me than is the more realistic, especially the war stuff, where I feel like as a society we've been moving away from like militaristic conquest and putting that on a pedestal. Like, I prefer the like hokey, silly kind of cartoon,
sci-fi maybe.
Yeah, it's just when it exists in a pure fantasy space, it's just, I think, better than when it's too realistic. When people, it's like WW2, you can get the realistic as much, and it's like, look, that was a real event, which was a horrible thing, just or not. It's horrid that humanity had to sink to that, and hopefully we'll never have to again. And do, like, again, scratching that itch that humans, particularly men, have around violence. It just makes me think of that like pedophile doll analogy and being like, yeah, well, if they're not doing it in real life, isn't that good? And be like, I don't know if it's good or not. It still weirds me out. You know what I mean? Where that line is.
Where is we normally don't necessarily try to look at the comments. I was just looking at the comments quickly on Twitch, and I saw Lord Shaper made the comment with regards to the Call of Duty's online community being toxic. And it's true. It's sort of well known in gamer circles that like certain game online communities are toxic, and that Overwatch, for example, is generally not. And I know that Blizzard puts in a lot of work to sort of curate it a bit. There's even talk about them watching like these YouTube streamers to figure out if someone's toxic and get them out of the game. But that is something that I associate a little more with first-person shooters than I do with other types. One of the games that Bo plays regularly, this Heroes of the Storm game, is like a strategy game. Now, as much as I like to shit on games like that because I'm not good at them, they definitely require a lot of thinking. a lot of brain work and all this. First person shooters, for the most part, do not. Yes, they can be complicated, or like if you look at my kill death ratio in games like PlanetSide compared to somebody like Bo's, there's obviously some thinking involved in that you can, but nothing compared to a game like Civilization or whatever. So the online communities for most of those games tend to be quite a lot healthier than the online communities for first person shooters. I think that's the thing that gives me the heebie-jeebies about the first-person shooters, is that sometimes those games tend to attract the worst people. And when I play online, like if I'm getting called all sorts of profane names, there's a good chance that that game's a first-person shooter, you know, like, and that element bothers me, not enough to stop playing necessarily, but it is notable, and I think it's because there's an instant win. Like, you've instantly won. That guy's gone. You can send them a message. Like in a game like Civilization, or even the game that like Heroes of the Storm that Bo's playing, they're long drawn out matches in which like you give a little, you get a little, whatever. And so, you know, rubbing it into somebody's face minute to minute is probably not as useful, or you could risk looking really bad. Whereas in a first-person shooter, it's sort of, and some would say, "Oh, that's part of the fun, insulting someone." You know, I'm like, I don't know, I don't like. I know you guys are about to call me on my shit momentarily, but before you
well, no,
do,
I wasn't even. I think it's a really good point. I mean, but I think it's like you're talking.
I'm a noted troll,
and you'll often hear the term toxic masculinity, which I think is a real thing, and very linked to violence and power, and I think that it makes sense, and it follows that the worst communities fall into the type of games that are maybe the most cutthroat, the most violent, the less community oriented, the more like I pwn you, suck, like I'm, you know, just power dynamic, winning, killing, testosterone driven, like that those type of men congregate there and being like, yeah, that toxic masculinity is toxic, and that it breeds toxic communities makes complete sense. That's certainly not all first person shooters, but it's a portion of them. And I think the unfortunate thing is there's a huge market, right? There's a lot of men who are like that. There's a lot of men who are fucked up, and they want outlets too, and so there'll always be those games that serve that type. And you know, hopefully there'll be other ones that draw people more into a positive community experience instead of one that just feeds the trolls, as they say. And I think that stuff is growing. Like, that people are seeing the value in this more and more.
All right, well, I'm more or less ready to move into verdicts. Sure. You guys?
Yeah, I'm good. Let's do it. Verdict time. Where's it? Here we go. It's time for order in the courts.
Order, I said. Order in the court.
Order in the courts. Crofton.
I'll go first.
You should go first.
All right. I had a bit of a hard time with this one. Part of me wanted to, and I think Bo called me on it a little bit, but like overanalyze this sort of thing. And as a gamer that's not necessarily a traditional gamer in many ways, like I sometimes get down on gaming culture and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, I get wanting to be like, well, what are the impacts? How is this related to the other things? Whereas I've been frustrated as much as Bo has in the past with like media coverage and blaming like giant shootings on video games when they're really, what do you call it? Bigger fish to fry, shall we say. So, and then it's like, what's my relationship with first-person shooters in particular? Well, I'm like, some of my most favorite games are first-person shooters, and I've thought of a bunch more since we started this. And I love sort of like the immersive experience, and I've put in a lot more sort of like time into first-person shooters. than I have a lot of, like a lot of movies lately. I don't watch as many movies as I used to. So it's like an entertainment of choice. Hasn't seemingly negative affected me in any way, but at the same point, like that doesn't mean that it won't have negative effects to other people. Are there garbage first person shooters? Yes, there are a lot. Or is there a ton of toxic communities? Yes, there are. And I know that there's ways of blocking that though, and so I have to think, does that toxicity and do any sort of lingering concerns I have about that overwhelm the hundreds of hours I've played PlanetSide with my friends on, that I've had these sort of exciting moments playing in the underwater world of Rapture and stuff like that, and in the end it's not enough there for me to say that first person shooters for me personally, Crofton, are anything other than good, so I'm going to say good. However, I would be I'm more than willing to admit my bias on this. This is part of this show, in the sense that, like, I'm a gamer. I like these games. I play them. I enjoy them. And if there are negative effects to them, they aren't so explicit that they've allowed me to affect my verdict. So I'm gonna say good, but I was on the border with bullshit there, and for most of the show I was leaning bullshit, and it was really just thinking about them and me personally that I was like, you know what? No, I actually enjoy these games, so I'm gonna say they're good.
Okay, I'm gonna go next. I think that first-person shooters are a good genre of video game. They hit me at a point in my life where I was very much, it was very exciting to be maybe 10, I'm a little older, and just to feel like you're entering into a new era of technology, and it's still amazing to see where they've gone today. Just because we did spend a lot of time talking about the violent aspects, I don't think shooters are. I think it's about as important to the discussion of violence amongst ourselves as chess is to the propensity for war. Like I really fundamentally disagree with a lot of the sensationalism around it. So they're good. That's good genre video game.
All right. Well, yeah, I'm having some trouble with this one, I must say. Clearly, I have a negative bent on this, and like Bo and Croft, and like, I remember when I first played Doom, and it blew my mind, and I was like, "This is the best." And I loved it, and it was like, I think I was 13, and like I like blowing shit up and killing shit, and I spent hundreds of hours playing first-person shooters of various kinds, and had a lot of fun doing that. And so I'm like, is that good? And I'm like, but I'm like, I don't know. And I'm debated and still can't decide between bullshit or bad, because I feel like I can be self-reflective in the sense that there are things that I might enjoy that I don't know that are good. Like, for instance, I know that I don't like violence. I know that I enjoy violent fantasies like D&D or games. I enjoy those things. Would it be better if I didn't, because I just didn't have violence in me? I think that would be better. But that's not who I am. I'm a human being. I'm a human animal. Humans are kind of violent-y things. It is a reflection of us. It's a better outlet than going out and committing violence. And I think there's also something highly linked to freedom, because we live in a safer society and violence is less present. We're constrained by that, so games give you this sense of freedom, and what comes with that is like violence and like risk and dying and all this stuff that you don't have that freedom in real life, but you trade it for safety, and that's a good trade and one we should make more. But I don't know, like in terms of the, oh God, I guess I'll just say bullshit, and I'll leave it at that.
It feels right. You're conflicted. It feels right.
Well, I'm conflicted, but like it's more because I'm like in my gut, I'm like, I think these things are bad, and I really just have to see through.
I think violence is bad, and committing heinous acts towards one another is reprehensible.
It is, and I mean,
the games simulate that kind of behavior. So I
that's
get
it, and in first-person shooters in particular, where it's like there are many games where violence is an outcome of story, one in which the context is very strong, and you can be like, it can trigger, vengeance and revenge and kinds of things that seem founded, like violence that has a place. But often in shooters, it's like you drop into the game and you're like, kill, 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 kill. And it's like, what do these people do to me?
The relaunch of Doom, that was one of its salient points, was that because always they try to justify violence in shooters with these stories nowadays, and Doom was just like, here's a gun.
Just
be on your way.
But it's Hellspawn, so I mean, like, what do you want?
Sure,
Really?
I mean, and that's kind of the context. But I mean, in a lot of the most popular aspects of these games are the like PvP aspects, where it's literally like, okay, match starts, everyone in there, and just like kill.
You know what?
I have a major problem with, but I'm gonna leave it at bullshit. I want to say bad, but I'm like, I think that there's room.
It's tough when you've because I'm in this same boat except 2 other verdicts, and it's tough when you've had so much personal enjoyment. It's not like something that there's so much evidence that really like damns it. You know what I mean? Like, it's still. I understand celebrating violence in any capacity, how that can be, the negative connotations to that, but it's not like right now you have in the gun debate in the States, you've got like this association, the National Rifle Association, and they're like essentially defending their leisure activity ignoring all evidence to the contrary that this is, hey, you know what? Your leisure activity might be a little bit dangerous or could use maybe a few more rules and that sort of thing. And I'm always reticent to be like that, somebody that doesn't look beyond my borders. But at the same time, at this one, I feel comfortable saying
that's a good analogy.
I feel comfortable where this is at right now, and with my enjoyment and all that to go on the good side. But at the same time, there's enough there that makes it confusing.
The problem is this is outdated. The most violent genre of video game right now is the Battle Royale, which is a third-person shooter where you aim in first person, but it's mostly third person.
But it's essentially a first-person shooter. You can play those games.
I think you spend most of your time in third person. It's a mix of both, but regardless, it doesn't qualify. And yet, there's something horrifying. There's something horrifying about being alone in nothing but your underwear and finding a handgun and sneaking around a corner, only have to have 4 guys rifle you in the back instantaneously. That is shocking.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
it's good.
If you want to tell us what your thoughts are on first-person shooters, and I tell you, I think a lot of the listeners listen to this show, through Bo's other shows and all this, may have strong opinions about games in general and about first-person shooters, perhaps in particular. You can send us an email, goodbadbull@gmail.com. You can follow us online or comment on Twitter @goodbadbull. We stream live on Twitch. We've gotten a good sort of chat participation. Thanks to all of you who participated. That's twitch.tv/goodbadbull. Goodbadbull.com is the website. You can go there. You can find all our old episodes. We definitely would love for you to check out some of our back catalog as we hit the high numbers. And gentlemen, I tell you, you're individuals of an individual nature, trapped on an island where you have to hunt each other. Where can the folks reach you?
You're supposed to kick it to one person specifically. What's going on here, buddy?
Bo.
Okay, Bo, let's do it at the same time. 1, 2,
first
3.
First to shoot wins.
At Bo Schwartz. I'm at Bo Schwartz.
I think they could probably get that, and I'm at
Time was terrible, Bo. Come on.
Yeah. By the way, check out my. Oh, never mind. Go ahead.
I wanted to rush through that because now I want to talk about what our favorite first-person shooters are. So I mean,
we could have done that in the main topic instead of indulging the violence. But okay, it's fine. It's fine. You could have helped me. You could.
Wait, but just before you do, because when Bo was talking about all the things he liked about first-person shooting, and you could see me probably chuckling, he's like, when you're a sniper and you get like a great headshot, or you go around and you find you come up behind someone and shoot them in the back. Like, it's also fucking violent. It's sort of hilarious. Where it's like, the violence has nothing to do with anything.
Also super fun. By the way, I linked a clip to one of Scott's most viewed Twitch page, clips that we were playing PUBG. You should watch that.
Okay, we will after, but Okay, let's say top 3 first-person shooters of all time. Mike, you go first.
Top
You,
3?
yeah, your top 3 favorite first-person shooters of
I
all
don't
time.
think I've played enough of them. Okay,
You've
well,
only played enough to have a top 3. It's very easy. I can almost
well,
do
Planet Side, I would say,
Okay,
and then
so
I would give
Planet
Doom.
Side is 1.
Yeah, I
That's
give it number 1 because I played
Yeah.
the most and I liked it the best because it had greater aspects than just killing, team coordination and whatnot. And then number 2, I'd say Doom 2, Doom 2.
Yeah.
Because I played me a lot of Doom 2, and I was pretty good at that game, and I liked it. And then number 3, I can't quite remember the name, but it was a Star Wars first-person shooter.
Dark Forces, Jedi Knight.
The Dark Forces, I believe.
Dark Forces.
What was the dude's name? The main dude? Kyle.
Kyle Katarn.
The fact that he's called Kyle is so lame. Like, really,
Okay,
Kyle?
yeah.
Come on. It's the Star Wars universe. You call him Kyle?
Oh, top 3. Let's go.
Top 3 first-person shooters.
Yeah, it's harder than you think. I'm
It's
debating
probably
right now.
it's probably Doom. The new Doom actually is one of the best shooter games.
Is that number 1?
It's I can put it number 1 unless I think of something that knocks it off. Probably. I haven't played the new Wolfenstein, but the latest Wolfenstein is quite good. The other one, I'd probably say Metro 2033. It's off the top of my head.
Really?
Yeah.
So no Planet Side in your top 3?
Planetside, best game ever. It's not the best shooter.
Okay, that's fair.
That is a good distinction.
That
But
is
for me,
fair.
like,
So I'll go. This is hard. So here's
Bulletstorm's
the deal.
another good one.
Mine are historically context sensitive because 2 of the 3 of them are not. I'm putting PlanetSide in there for the experience. I almost put PlanetSide 2, which I'm playing now, and I really still enjoy.
Get on with it. Number 1.
Okay, number 1's PlanetSide. Number 2 is GoldenEye, which is very outdated, but at the time.
Hipster.
That shit was tight.
And you were the local king of PlanetSide.
And number 3
GoldenEye.
was the original Deus Ex, which is Deus Ex or whatever, which is my sort of game for those sort of immersive single player, where both GoldenEye and PlanetSide are sort of much more on the multiplayer side of things. But I was thinking about it, and I was like, man, that bumps like BioShock off the list, System Shock. It bumps like
Borderlands 2.
Jedi Knight 2, and I was baller at Jedi Knight 2. Like it bumps.
You were like the original troll.
I was with the dark side, baby. There's a lot of games that got bumped off the list. So no, it has, like, when did Wolfenstein come out? Like early 90s. There's been a lot since then, and I guess we're not at peak first person shooter yet. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear from people on this one, because I feel like there's a lot of people who play
Unreal
first-person
Tournament
shooters.
is another big. I don't think anyone here is a big fan of it, but it's a big time.
I played
classic.
a tiny bit of like Unreal like ways back, and I mean, I just did not like it. Even when I was in the first-person shooters, I was.
It's very fast. It's like
super twitchy. Yeah.
The other big ones are Quake, Quake Tournament. Tribes was a big one, and Half-Life is like. Half-Life should be all of our answers, to be honest with you.
I feel
it's not. It doesn't have to be, but it is like the objective best shooter game.
Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2 are the 2 most overrated games of all time. There, I said it.
Whoa! Shots fired.
Hot take.
Yeah, Counter-Strike, another big one in the shooter genre too.
Yeah, there's a lot that are popular, and they relate to what you were able to play, because I didn't have a computer that could run a lot of, like, the Quake 1 through 3 generation, the Unreal Tournament, all that sort of stuff. My computer had aged out at that point. I had a Nintendo 64. Again, Mike, when I mentioned earlier about how they're easy to make, with the mouse and keyboard, they were easy to make. There's a reason they weren't on consoles, and it was because until the advent of the Nintendo 64's joystick, there were no joysticks, and they're the only thing that makes first-person shooters doable on, like, imagine the Super Nintendo gamepad with it's just like it's got an X and playing a first-person shooter. Even GoldenEye had a button that you had to hold to, like, so you could move but you couldn't look at the same time. You had to hold a button to look. It was sort of wonky. Like if you'd play it now, you'd be like, this is screwed up.
It's all an evolution, right? It takes time for these things. They've been fine tuning them for years now.
All right, okay. Now, so the bow can do like a cut. Let's make his job easier. Let's make gun sounds.
It doesn't work that way. I've already found a place to cut it off. we droned on way too long about the top games or something.
Top 3 games.
It's got to be punchier than that. Although probably
we're cutting out.
You better have had my top 3 in there. I will be pissed.
You don't even know.
I will too know.
I saw on the chat that
it'd be really funny if they do Mike's. It's like Mike's top 3, Bo's top 3, and then it's like da na 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 na, and you're like after the credits. Okay, now my top 3, and then it cuts there. I'm like, fuck off.
You should do that just to make Carlton feel
All
better.
Right. What about top? There's so many shooters. It's like almost ridiculous even trying to figure that out. I just don't play.
It's so funny because recently that I played that game Overcooked with Crofted, and I'm like, it's the best game ever. I love Overcooked so much.
It's just because that's your jam right now. But you'd play another game. I remember we played Portal 2 one time. You came out, you're like, oh, Portal 2 is the best game ever. It's like whatever.
No, I think I like Overcooked better. I like this sort of simplicity.
No mention for Halo at all, by the way, and that's considered.
Yeah, that sucks.
But Halo,
it's considered like a popular.
I know it's
shooter.
Big.
I've played a lot of Halo,
like it.
and I like Halo more than say Half-Life, but I don't like it that much. Like it's
not my jam either, but it's hard. You can't like in an objective like what are the most popular.
Yeah, but this is not overall. This is you personally.
Yeah, nobody would say PlanetSide. Let's be fair here. Nobody. You could listen to 100 podcasts of top 5 shooters. Nobody would be like, "Oh yeah, PlanetSide."
I've mentioned it on Core at least 3 different times because sometimes when I'm just randomly talking, and it'll be like, we know the greatest game of all time is PlanetSide. Just as a random aside, it does come up. There is one podcast repping
Good for you, Bo.
Bo. He's like, I never plugged this show, but I've plugged PlanetSide a lot of times.
Because like it comes up because we're like, we like this game, Heroes of the Storm. It's the best game, and I'd be like, it's the best game out now, but the best game of all time is PlanetSide.
It's objectively.
I'm only playing Heroes because it's the second best game, and the first best game, the servers went down.
If PlanetSide 2 had never come out, you would nobody would know PlanetSide. Like it would be really obscure right now. But because PlanetSide 2 exists, people are like, "Oh yeah, it was the one before that." And but I've been playing a lot of PlanetSide 2.
Has it gotten any better? Is it the same kind of crappy game that it is? Like
no, dude, you put in a lot of time. Honestly, they've added a lot of stuff now. I'm not sure how much stuff PlanetSide 1 had that 2 doesn't have.
We had a lot of goodwill for what they were doing, but if I'm being honest, it missed. You should stop wasting your time on that
No,
game.
It's fun, man. I'm enjoying it. I did a big bio thing invasion, like one of those biodomes, and it was a good time.
It was a good try. And it had my hopes up for a long time, and I played it a lot, but at a certain point, I just said, "I'm done with this. It's just not. I don't want to play another like has-been game like with the first PlanetSide and this dwindling population forever."
Mike, did you ever play any of the Half-Life games? Those games?
I think I did play a little bit of one, but I was like, didn't get into it.
Yeah, I didn't get it. See, I cannot understand. Like, if you go onto a list of like top 100 PC games of all time or something like that, like of all time, of all PC games, often it's like number 1 Half-Life 2, number 2 Half-Life 1, and I'm like, I don't get it. Like, I honestly don't. I've played all of Half-Life 2, not all of Half-Life 1, to be fair, and I didn't have a computer that could run it at the time, but like they just don't seem as great as everybody's. It's not like they're horrible. It's just that people are like, these are so good, and I'm like, I don't get it.
It's also like, I mean, like I mentioned a couple times, like when I first played Doom, the first Doom, I have like a crystal clear memory that's so clear of first playing that game and having my mind blown. And I think that maybe that game was in the right place at the right time. That has a lot of like weight in people's nostalgia, so that it like, because I recall when I when it was coming out, it was stuff around it. So I think it's just held on to that, you know.
Half-Life 1 definitely was notable for being one of the first-person shooters with a story, other than just like kill the Nazis, kill the Hellspawn. Like it had a story. I get that, and supposedly the AI was really impressive at the time. I don't know, but like obviously old. Half-Life 2 though, which came out, in the in like maybe what was it, 2006 or something around there.
No, it's older than that, I think.
Is it? Well, either way, it was like to me, that game is a game that people still talk of like it's the best.
2004. Okay, you're close.
Like they still talk about it like today. Like that game is the best. And I was like,
good.
I played through it once on the orange box on console, so like I didn't even play the PC version. So take that with a grain of salt. But it's definitely the same game, and it just seems like it's way overhyped.
It's one long level. It's basically one like there's no loading. There's loading screens, but they just stops and it loads a bar. It's one level, and it has that. Yep. Oh yeah.
Like
I don't know if there were loading screens.
Town
Ghost
Town.
I don't know if there were loading screens on the console version or not, but on the PC version, you get the checkpoints and it loads some assets in. But it's basically one continuous journey from front to back. It had good voice capture for the time, like the characterization of
the Alex Vance and all that. Like I played it.
Yeah, like it was notable, and also a lot of shooters skip out on good puzzles, and that has good puzzles, and it's a slow burn. Like I think the game like has this sort of slow build up to where you're just like.
Slow build up.
Hey guys, I'm gonna cut in and just say
it's to
adios.
Be continued, and they never do any follow up.
So it's like later.
It ends on a cliffhanger.
Yeah. Oh, I know that's the worst part, but that's like an internet meme now.
But like, okay,
have you seeing all the Half-Life stuff coming out right now? The Final Fantasy 15 release has a Gordon Freeman skin for the characters.
Does it really?
Yeah.
See, okay.
It's like news today.
If The Empire Strikes Back was like the last Star Wars movie, right? So it comes out, it's like, it ends. Everybody's like, wow, The Empire Strikes Back, so good. But that's because Return of the Jedi came out. If Return of the Jedi had never come out, you'd be like, wow, that fucking movie blows. It ends and everybody lost and this sucks now. But like, that's not what happened, right? So anyway,
we should have a look at the Twitch screen, what it looks like right now, because Mike left.
Okay, just hang on a second. Fuck, goddamn Half-Life. It just feels like nobody agrees with me when. Oh, it's all me. That's an improvement.
But it's like weird parts of you just because of. Anyways, thank you, chat room, for hanging around. It was good to have you here.
Tell a chat room. You should justify, like, reinforce my belief that Half-Life is overrated because somebody needs to do that because nobody I talk to. It's like I live on an island.
You were like me on an episode of Good, Bad, or Bullshit about online shooters. Can't get away from the violence talk.
Well, it is
have a good night.
First-person shooters. Like there is.
Yeah.
No one agrees.
Have a good night, chat room. Thank you for hanging out. It was great seeing y'all.
God damn it, Clown Baby.
Love you. Hey, Clown Baby. Thanks for hanging out. We'll catch you on the next episode. Goodbye.
Thank you, True Root. I saw that. It is overrated. Replace slightly with very, and I agree.
Hey, man, now that we're leaving, we got a whole bunch of people joining. It's great to see y'all here, but we're out. Thank you. Good night.